Right. So, in studying writing your personal statement question, if you are not a native or if you've never written any essay in your lives, fret not. Today, I am going to show you how I process writing at least a paragraph of it. Right. So, there is this question that I've taken from my application when I was trying to apply for Master of Positive Psychology at the University of Melbourne, Australia, and this is one of the questions, and the limit of this is 500 words. But I'm only going to show you the first 150 words just to make your learning a bit more engaging. Okay, so first, what you need to do is you need to read the question really carefully and really dissect the question, right? So in this case, the question is, how did you become interested in positive psychology, and in what ways have you engaged with it since that time? Sounds like a very long question, right? Especially with these examples, reading, attending events, and whatnot. For some people, this is easily understood, but for some others, this could be quite difficult. So if you find it quite difficult to understand complex, compound sentences and, basically questions that are very long, I would like you to notice the keywords first and dissect them one by one. And this is what I did here as an example. So I took the keywords. So for example, the things that are quite important. How do I find the most important keyword? Is that if I remove any words here, do I still capture the meaning in my mind? In that case, what sort of stuck in my mind are these 4 keywords, which is how, because it's really asking about the origin or your process of becoming or even understanding a particular topic. And then interest, it's when do you find this, particular topic to be interesting for you, or, do you have this curiosity that stems from somewhere? There's also positive psychology. Obviously, this is the name of the course. And lastly, it's engagement. So it's asking you about you and engaging with the particular program, which is positive psychology. Essentially, it's asking about your interaction. So this is, again, a multiplicity on how, how did you interact and how did you become interested in this particular topic? Now, to answer this, sometimes we could go a long way, but I would like to recommend that if you can, answer them directly first with a short answers, right? So if you're about to be asked on how, then, the answer for me is I am always fascinated by the human minds, especially when I look at people who are in pain or within illness. And when they find compassion and gratitude, they find this alleviation of physical burden. But there's also interest in me, like intrigue. You see, for example, I'm intrigued by people who are clearly in laden terms that they are clearly disadvantaged, but at the same time they have well-being that often exceeds people who are in quote-unquote normal conditions. And so this is something that interests me in this particular field of area, which is positive psychology. And this is my engagement. I'm talking about my capability as clinical psychologist. I find this quite interesting because we see a lot of people with mental illness, psychopathology, but we fail to see them as capable first. We always see them as someone with illness instead of someone with potential to eradicate their own illness. It's always been that we are the one who's healing them and not themselves. And, I think that is sort of a reflection we need to be more acute towards, right? And the last one is my implementation and my engagement as well towards this one, right? Because when I think about this question, I think about the fact that humans, especially in positive psychology, right? The fact that humans they really wanted to live so badly. They want to have a good life, right? So that signals to me that they have this self-empowering drive. And, when I am looking into this theme of self-empowering drive, I always see there is a hope that people possess, right? So people are not defined by their illness. Right? I think a lot of people this day in TikTok, we tend to see illness as identity, which is fine, especially if you're formally diagnosed. This could help form a good community, but sometimes we overlook the things that makes us human. It's not always the illness itself, but also the capability to bounce back or resilience, right? Now, with these points that I've made here, I sort of prioritize them first, what I want to display per each main topic paragraphs. In this case, the power of the human mind and how the humanity is filled with potential and how pathology isn't always the answer. And these are going to be my main topics in the whole essay, right? To make the structure quite easy to understand, sorry, I use the normal basic formula. So I would call it this hamburger formula because it's basically paragraph 5. Sorry, paragraph 5 should be a summary, but essentially the main topics which you've written here is being squished by two breads, which is the introduction on the top and also the summary. So it's not main topic, sorry, but yeah. So and each paragraph within each section will use a consistent format. So this is what makes your writing a bit more cohesive and a bit more flowy, right? So it is easier to understand. So I use what my teacher would tell me, which is TEAL, and it stands for topic, explanation, example, and linking. When you're studying this on primary school, perhaps the T is topic sentence, explanation sentence, example sentence, and linking. But because we're doing master level writing, sometimes the topic sentence could be more than one, right? So because sometimes the topic can be contextualized with more details, right? Okay, so one of the example here that I made is to answer the question, and I'm just going to make the introduction part, is the topic is starting with about 2 years prior, I worked alongside geriatric patients with multiple comorbidities who magically recovered from her malignant condition only after taking care of her mental health. So this is my context, right? So the topic is the context. It could describe the context of that. It could describe the context of why I interested to begin with. And so I explain my context, right? So I explain it deeper. So why is this interesting? It's because it doesn't make sense to me, It doesn't make sense that when someone takes care of their mental health, it magically replenishes their body, right? So I've never seen it the other way around. And so example is basically I'm telling you an example, perhaps an explanation to somewhat, or even a concrete explanation, is that there is a power to it, right? That hope is the example, and emotional release, those are the main example, is a powerful driving force to healing. Where the mind is free from fears, the body rests. And another kind of example you can do is like this. Such example of terminally ill patients find their solace in extreme degree, their healing factors through gratitude, compassion, and most of all, an all-encompassing gentleness. As you can see, this example, is a bit more subtle, and this one is a bit more concrete. And then you finish that with linking. When you're doing a linking sentence, think about what the next paragraph is going to be, right? So in this case, I'm going to start with my main topic. So, maybe the best way for me is to just talk about all the main topics there is. So here, the human mind is a powerful, filled with potential, and never should be reduced exclusively to its psychopathology. And when it's consolidated, it's like that, right? So if you read this, it's going to make much sense where I am going with my thoughts, right? And so that's what we mean by clarity. It's making sure that people can see your intent, your info as clearly as possible. If they can read this, they could imagine what you're going through. So that's what clarity simply means. Cohesion and flow, it just means that it sticks to one another, one sentence supports one another, and it reads really easily from one sentence to another. It doesn't have that resistance or linguistic resistance, right? So it's only 149 words, just this one. Look at the limit that is being asked, 500 words. And so much plenty space left, So, if you use this basic structure, and this tips that I made, hopefully this can be somewhat of a catalyst on how you can write your first personal statement. So good luck.